Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Forever Blowing Bubbles by the band Clearlight.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So one last time before it actually happens, I want to let you all know that tomorrow at 1 p.m. EST I'm going to be doing a live stream, and in that live stream I'm gonna take your song recommendations, of course, and I'm gonna listen to them on stream and tell you what my personal impressions are from them on the spot. So if there are any songs that you want me to listen to, you can suggest them in the live chat of the stream. So again, tomorrow at 1 p.m. EST, I'll be seeing you all there. But aside from that, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So I never really detail what my days actually consist of, so I think this will be a great occasion of telling you so. So I wake up each and every morning at around 7:30 in the morning, and then I quickly get ready and go ahead to leave the house and take the bus of 8:05. And that bus, I ride with it around 35 minutes like average, and then I get to my work where I do, things of work. But in that time period of taking the bus ride, I really have not a lot to do, and previously in the past I used to read books, but who does this thing anymore? Nobody reads books anymore, So instead I decided that that time would be greatly used if I listened to albums and reviewed them on the way. And one basically mandatory thing that I do when I go on these bus rides and I listen to the albums is of course go on the Prog archives to research about what I'm listening to and thus better understand the albums. And something that happened about a week ago and is still going on as of now is the fact that in those hours of the day, the Prog Archives website seems to be inoperable in those specific hours. So this results basically in me going on listening to albums without really having a lot of knowledge about them. And that's usually not a problem when you have an album like Queen's second album, which has a lot of information about it online, but it does become much more of a problem when I'm reviewing albums like Circles or even the album that we're reviewing today. And while Forever Blowing Bubbles by Clearlight does have some information about it online, you never really can find the same information as well as you find on the Prog archives, where specific people interject their own knowledge and share it with the rest of the world in the forms of comments and reviews. But by this point of the year, I'm basically already simping for the Prog archives. I love that website so much. I really love it so much. I use it for everything that has to do with the series, and it's probably the second best cause for why this series basically exists after, of course, my Patreons. So yeah, but I really need to take the chill pill and just get along without it. But if this video feels like it's kind of lacking in information, that's because it is, and please do cut me some slack.
Cut me some slack, yeah.
So Clearlight are a band that formed back in 1973 in France, and they are comprised basically of one person, and that's Cyril Vordeaux. Now, he is mostly the main mastermind behind Clearlight's music, with all the rest of the members basically being included as contributors but not as actual band members, but there are certain albums like the one we're reviewing today which has more people in leading composition roles. But one thing that set Clearlight apart from the rest of the progressive rock French bands is that these guys were signed with Virgin Records, the label that of course resided in the UK, and thus these guys worked and operated a lot of time in Britain. Now that is fun and all, and it did gain them a lot of attraction, but unfortunately one thing that didn't come into fruition is that Verdot himself never actually moved to the UK in spite of Virgin Records' insistence, and thus it has become to some sort of bad blood within them, to the point where Verdot just gave up on everything and decided to depart the band whose leader he was. But in his time with the band, he managed to create their debut album in 1974, their second album, which is of course today's album of topic, Forever Blowing Bubbles, and he even managed to create yet another album that was actually released after his departure in 1976, used mainly in recordings he already did. Now 1977 really didn't see a lot of things from the band, but in 1978 a new lineup for Clearlight was created without Verdot this time, and these guys released an album called Visions and some more, and Verdot joined the band in later years, but that's a different story for a different day. Now, I literally had no idea what I was getting into with this album today. I had no idea what this was going to sound like. As I said, I didn't read any reviews about it online, so I just came in with a blank mind, I guess. And you know what? I wasn't disappointed at all. Forever Blowing Bubbles is a mostly instrumental album, which to me at least sounded like a more rougher and hard rock version of Happy the Man, mixed with some Renaissance influences as well as some various jazz influences. Suffice to say, Clearlight's interpretation of what prog is was definitely very much refreshing. It didn't really sound like anything that I've really ever heard. Again, I made some comparisons, but in all honesty, they have a pretty much unique and original sound, which I very much enjoyed, and I really enjoyed that sense of a burst of fresh air. Now personally, I found that this album is an interesting case of an album that only gets better and better as it progresses, and on the second track on here, called Without Words, I thought that that track was going to be my favorite from this album. I was sure about that, but then the next track came along and I decided that that one's gonna be my favorite, and then the next track came along and that was my favorite, and then another track came along and I decided that that's going to be my favorite as well. So it took me a while with not a lot of tracks to decide that all of them are favorites of mine, but one is more than the rest, and that one is actually Narcissus and Goldmoon, but I'm gonna get into that a bit later on. Firstly, I'd like to point out some two key moments from this album which were left with me in a very memorable state, with the first one being the way that each and every song on here starts. Every song on here has the beginning that, to me at least, sounds like some very much synthesized and electronic bubbles being blown in a stream underwater. I don't know what that would usually sound like, but that's what it sounded like to me, and I really like this consistency of starting each and every track like that and then developing that sound into something new and unique that forms the song itself. And the second thing which I really liked about this one actually came in the second track, called Without Words. That song is a great track, and at one point it has this sort of cacophonous, orchestrated part going in the background, and then you have a very thrashy keyboard solo on top of it all. And while the keyboard solo isn't that impressive of itself, they made excellent use of oscillating between the stereo directions, basically going from one ear to another and just jumping around in a way that is very organic and very immersive for the listener, and that's one of the things which I probably will never forget about this album, and another reason for why I'm gonna always listen to this one with headphones on. Now, as I said, I had a lot of favorites from this album. Specifically, the song Way is just an amazing track, which was almost my favorite from this album, but I do believe that it has to be cut short by like a minute or a minute and a half. Ergo Trip is also an amazing tune, maybe lesser than the rest, but it also introduces instruments like the violin and the saxophone, which adds so much to this song, to the point where I thought it was going to be my favorite. But as I said, I settled down on choosing Narcissus and Goldmoon as my favorite, which is, I personally believe, an unconventional decision. Why did a shorter, less progressive and non-instrumental song prevail better than the rest? Well, the reason for it is that everything that it did right. Si on avait besoin du cinquième saison by Harmonium was basically the album that opened my French chakra on this list, and now whenever I hear something in French I can't help to love it all the more. And of course this song has lyrics on it sung with amazing female vocals which are almost angelic, and I really love that, and it's sung in French, as well as of course having some of those medieval influences that you expect to find on an album by Griffin, as well as amazing woodwinds and flutes, and just an overall vibe that I really can't try and describe with words. But knowing all that, I listened to this song and it just blew me away. It is so good. It takes you into this like very short journey that is just pleasurable at each and every turn, and I like that very much. And despite this entire album being generally very good and consisting of very well composed progressive songs, I just believe that this one is a bit better than the rest. And this album closes off with a track called Jungle Bubbles. Now this one is surprisingly more popular than the rest, and like, you know, a noticeable margin, and I really don't get why, because this one basically sounds like its title. It's just some bubbles in the beginning, then it goes into like a, you know, South American jungly groove, and then it just kind of wavers off, and I really don't get the appeal with this one. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but this one probably is the weakest one from the entire album. And yeah, that's how this album concludes. It's a really cool album, which I do believe is not as memorable as I might have wanted it to be. I do believe that it takes a few more listens to actually start getting really into the music on here, but I definitely see myself coming back to it, so that's always a plus side on any piece of music I listen to. But as a whole, I'm really happy that I got introduced to Clearlight. They're a very interesting band, and you know what, usually I don't like very much that comes out of France specifically when it comes to prog, so I'm really happy that this came, because now I'm thinking about it in an entirely different light. So this is a great cover for a very good album, which has that feeling of a slightly obscure prog cover from the 70s. I don't know how else to describe it, but that's what it feels like. But I do believe that this album's cover Brilliance comes in the form of its connection to the rest of Clearlight's covers. You see, there's actually a direct connection between this album cover and the covers of the two albums that sandwich it between them. Their first album, Clearlight Symphony, features a cover which shows a head which is connected to a cable box, and all of the cables are going into the head except for one which is surreptitiously going off into the side into unknown territory. Now that question of where that cable went is basically answered with today's cover, when we see the cable coming out of the horizon and into the foreground, where we can see that it's a DIN cable, and that cable of course exhales bubbles out of it which float up into the sky. And as I said, this album has continuations to two of the covers that sandwich it, so of course the next album from this band also features a cover that has something to do with this one. So their next album, called Le Conte du Singe Fou, which means Tales of the Mad Monkey, features sort of bubbles that rise from the bottom and turn into half-eclipsed moons, and that's very cool. And these moons, of course, they're translated into their next cover for the album Visions, where they appear up in the sky. And you know what? I really love that. I love when bands take the idea of an album cover and elaborate upon it in ways that were not explored before, and we see that with various artists like Rams's Space Hymns or Caterpillar's Changes, or even, we'll talk about it later, by Nucleus. All of these covers having some really interesting gimmicks to them which make them all the more memorable. So yeah, if you know of an album that might not be such a great album but has a very interesting cover that has more than meets the eye to it, I'd love to know about it. But yeah, excuse me for this, but for now I'm gonna give this album a rating of 8 out of 10, but knowing myself, I might come back to this one several times and learn that I love it even more and raise that rating up to a 9, but for now that's what it's going to get. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're gonna be listening to Fish Rising by Steve Hillage. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Warnham, Rist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow.